Hi, I'm Katarzyna Wasowska.
I am Marianne Wasowska.
We are cousins photographers from Poland and France, and we would like to tell you more about Waiting for the Snow project, which was recently published by Yogurt Editions. The book was designed by our favorite Francesca Tode, and it includes very insightful essays by anthropologist Karolina Bielenin-Lęczowska and artist, curator, writer Francisco Medai.
It is taught as a travel notebook in a size which makes easy to bring it everywhere. And in the end, you can also find booklets with the essays of Carolina and Francisco, but also excerpts of songs and texts we used in the research, recipes, interviews. We wanted this information to be a context of the project, giving information about the pictures without being too descriptive.
Waiting for the Snow tells a story about Polish migration to Argentina and Brazil at the end of 19th and beginning of 20th century during the interwar period. We focus on Brazil and Argentina because these were the main destinations for Polish migrants, and its characteristic was rather unusual, as it was mainly rural. People left their villages pushed by hunger and lack of land, and the political context on both sides of the oceans was rather complex. Poland at that time didn't exist as an independent country. It was divided between Russia, Prussia, and Austro-Hungary. Farmers worked the land, but most of it belonged to the landlord, leaving very little for their own survival. Even though Polish migrants often had no real idea where they are going, what the climate was there, how far it was, and what language was spoken, the promise of owning their own piece of land was strong enough to make them leave everything behind. They crossed an ocean into the unknown, believing they would reach a land flowing with milk and honey. At the same time, Brazil was facing shortage of labor after abolition of slavery, and the government promoted the idea of whitening the country. Argentina, on the other hand, was building their dream of modern society based on the idea that only European can make it happen. And these racial policies strongly shaped how the migrants saw themselves and how they adapted to the new land, and which is especially important since most of them were farmers. For me, the biggest motivation to dive deep into the project came from the political situation in Poland around 2015. And unfortunately, it continues until today. At that time, the government started spreading really anti-immigrant propaganda. And I couldn't really understand how it's possible in the country whose history essentially is a history of emigration through partitions, war, communism, and later economic migration, can support such a negative attitude. Almost every Polish family has been touched by migration in some way or another, and government argued that the refugees, mostly from Syria at that time, cannot adapt here because of the different climate, different culture, and different environment. I thought that it's worth looking at Poles as migrants in these different climates, different environments, and different culture in South America, and see how it went after 150 years. And well, of course, as we went into the story, it got more and more complex the more we knew about it. We worked on the project for nearly 8 years. First, researching the story, finding the books about it, and making connection with the people who researched the area, and then traveling back and forth to Argentina and Brazil, meeting descendants, hearing to their stories, building images inspired by oral histories, which were passed through generation to generation. We like to think that we create something like documentary of collective memory. So we used our own photographs and family albums and documents to kind of build this visual narrative with multi-layers and multi voices being spoken. On one hand, we focused on this collective memory of Polish community, and so it would be gathering stories and images about the country of origin and about the travel and about also the first settlements and the first connection with the new land. And then we would go more into the farming and building the relationship and finding yourself in such a new environment. And this is also how the book goes in a way. From the other side, we explored creolization and hybridization of cultures, and we kind of tried to observe how like Slavic folklore intertwined with South American context and fauna and flora. And we believe that this create like new forms of identity, which is not only based on history, but it's also based on like this reconstruction and imagination and fantasy. And this created kind of second part of our story, which also relates in the book. And then what was like important for us for in the whole project and in the book itself is that you kind of can read it, of course, many times, but like that you can have the layer which is strongly based in history, but then you have another base which is like universal and metaphoric, we think, about the phenomenon migration itself.
We also wanted to work on the landscape in an editorial way, building a strategy of one image which is crossed by another page, which is kind of dividing the picture, and which talks about the landscape, bringing information about it, but in a kind of latent, poetic way. Thank you for sharing this time with us. We really hope our project will provoke some echoes in your personal history, in your personal context, because this is what we intended with this story, which is very specific, like to reach something more universal and who speaks to any kind of person, situations.
Okay, thank you for listening, and we hope you have a nice travel through the oceans, but also through time while getting to know our project. See you.